Well, hello there everybody and welcome to today's video. In this one I'm going to be talking about 10 amazing emulators to be playing in 2023 and beyond, ranging all the way from the older side of gaming and emulators all the way up to the most modern, cutting edge emulation available as of this moment in time. Now, going forwards on the channel I am going to be doing more retro / emulation related videos, so please subscribe to the channel if you've not done already, and linked in the description down below is my dedicated emulation server where you can show up, talk about all things emulation, host online emulated games, you know, help installing the emulators and talking about all kinds of retro games and stuff like that. It's a lot of fun in there. I urge you to join if you're interested in anything I talk about in this video. Also, not to forget, any of these emulators that support couch co-op, as in 2 players or more, you can actually play online using the Parsec program for PCs, completely free, and I will include a link in the description for my full installation and setup guide for that, and obviously join the Discord if you want to find online games with people as well. And of course, for the existing subscribers of the channel, I want to say a big thank you. Recently hit 10k, and yeah, do not fear, although I am going to be doing more emulation stuff, the Jurassic World Evolution 2 stuff will not stop. I'll just double the workload. It's all good, I'll cover both at the same time. That will not suffer. So just a little backstory about myself then. I've been involved in gaming for over 30 years, and I've been actually playing and using emulators for over 20 years, so hopefully that puts me in a very good position to be talking to you about the best emulators to be playing in 2023. And as always, you know, I love responding to comments, so if I've missed your favourite emulator or you want to suggest games for me to play based upon some of the suggestions I might throw out in this video, please hit me in the comments below and stick a like on the video if you've not done already, and once again please subscribe. If you wouldn't mind, it really helps. Thank you very much. So with all that said and done and out of the way, this list is not going to be in any necessary order of goodness because I jump and hop between these emulators all of the time, but these are all going to be great for all different kinds of gaming platforms. So first of all then, we are going to start with KFusion. Now this one is an oldie but a goodie. This is an all-in-one emulator for Sega Master System, Sega Game Gear, Sega Genesis / Mega Drive, Sega 32X and Sega CD. It emulates all of them things all in one, and although the last update to this emulator was 2010, there's a reason for that. It doesn't need any more updates. This emulator plays all of them things absolutely flawlessly with all different kinds of effects and everything like that. Save states as you've come to expect, built-in netplay as well, support for Game Genie codes and all kinds of other fun tips and tricks you can do. Obviously emulator controllers, that's going to be standard for all going forwards. But as a child growing up in the 90s, the very first console I ever played was a Sega Mega Drive, specifically Sonic the Hedgehog 1 at the age of 3 years old, and from then I was hooked. And from there I ended up with quite a vast Sega Mega Drive / Sega Genesis game collection, and I love to revisit them. Recently I've been replaying the Strike series of games, specifically Desert Strike, Jungle Strike and Urban Strike, for an upcoming full series retrospective that I'm working on for them, so stick around on the channel for that. But this emulator is flawless in its emulation. I know some of the fanboys will say this bit's not quite right, that's not quite right, but for general use this will play all games without issue, you know, flawlessly. Absolutely great emulator. Can't say much more about it. I don't want to go on about this one for too long because it is an old one that most people already know about, but for all your classic Sega emulation needs, this is gonna be it. For the next emulator then, we're going to be talking about Citra, which is a Nintendo 3DS emulator. Now the catalogue of games for the 3DS emulator is vast, varied and impressive, including games such as the Monster Hunter series, Ace Combat and all of the mainline Pokemon games, including my personal favourite, Pokemon Ultra Sun / Pokemon Ultra Moon. And yes, of course, the 3DS does have 2 screens, but this emulator lets you arrange them so the top and bottom, or the smaller window and a larger window, all kinds of useful stuff alongside that, including upscaling and frames per second mods as well, to increase frames per second on games from 30 FPS to 60 FPS. But the most impressive feature of this emulator is native online. Now what that means is this emulator can actually emulate an online environment, simulating local multiplayer but over the internet. So for example, on Monster Hunter you can join up with your friends and go out on quests and things like that. But just a little anecdotal story, my partner and I was playing Ultra Sun, she was playing Ultra Moon, and some Pokemon you have to trade to get them. So we was running one window with me having Ultra Sun open, one window with her having Ultra Moon open, and literally both connected to the same lobby online, and we traded Pokemon, having 2 instances of the emulator open, and that's how we completed the Pokédex on each game. So that just gives you a hint of just how good this emulator is. And while I've not played this one too much recently because of emulators taking up my time a bit further down the list and other commitments, there is a whole world of content to be enjoyed on this platform. The games that I listed earlier is just the tip of the iceberg for this platform. Yeah, honestly, if you want some games to play and you can obtain them legally, then Citra is definitely the emulator for you. And just a little side note, the Nintendo eShop for the 3DS is due to close in March of 2023, and Nintendo has not provided any real alternatives of how the massive catalogue of games for the 3DS are going to be supported in future. So a lot of these games are going to disappear, proving a very strong case as to why emulation is one of the very few ways of true video game preservation. I just thought I'd throw that in there for you. The next emulator I want to talk about then is Cemu, which is a Nintendo Wii U emulator. Now don't get me wrong, the Wii U was a commercial flop, but without a doubt it had some absolutely astonishingly good games, including but not limited to the Bayonetta series, Hyrule Warriors, Mario Kart 8, Monster Hunter 3, Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, a very solid entry in the series, and last but not least, the definitive way of playing The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now I'm pretty sure there is a portion of the gaming community that had put this game as their #1 game of all time, if not the top 10 game of all time. And with the features of this emulator, including graphics packs, shader presets, resolution upscaling, asynchronous shader cache, so there's no like shader stutter or anything like that, 60 FPS mods as well, this game looks fantastic on this emulator. I've cleared it from start to finish as well with no technical issues. I think it crashed once in like a 50-hour playthrough. Yeah, very stable and very well supported as well, this emulator, with regular mainline updates. And in all fairness, if you are wanting to emulate the Nintendo Wii U, this is basically your only option. But the good thing is, it's a great option, playing around 80 to 90% of games flawlessly. Yeah, there's 1 or 2 that don't work at all for this, but luckily in the game list it does highlight how playable games are as well. You know, it'll list minor graphical glitches, playable, unplayable. The games that are listed work 100% fine because I've played them all myself, but the main showstopper for this emulator is how well it plays The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the definitive way to play it. Even better than running on the Switch itself, which is the re-release of it. So yeah, if you own Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and you want to get the best out of it, run it on the Cemu Wii U emulator. Without a doubt, you'll get the best experience out of that game. And so far, this list has been a little Nintendo heavy. So the next emulator in this list is going to be RPCS3, a little bit of a tongue twister there, RPCS3, the PlayStation 3 emulator. and this emulator is right on the edge of cutting edge. And once again, the PlayStation 3's content library is jam-packed with great games, including a lot of exclusives as well. Now, some of the games I love to play on this emulator that work absolutely perfectly, there's Dead Nation, of course, The Last of Us, and not only that, this emulator actually plays Metal Gear Solid 4 absolutely flawlessly. Now, Metal Gear Solid 4 only released on the PS3 and hasn't had a re-release on any other platform since then, with no plans of ever re-releasing it as far as I'm aware. So the best way to play Metal Gear Solid 4 is using the RPCS3 emulator, and looking at this compatibility list on the rpcs3.net compatibility page, it says that 68.5% of every single PS3 game ever released is playable. That means can be completed all the way through with the most minor, if any, technical issues or graphical issues. So 68.5% of PS3 games can be played using this emulator with all of the quality of life features you've come to expect, you know, resolution upscaling, all kinds of FPS mods and other mods and stuff as well. You can also install updates and DLC using this emulator as well, which is all fan-dabby-dozy, let's be honest. And with most emulators on this list, this gets a nightly update as well, so there's new features, new upgrades to this happening on a daily basis. So yeah, if you want to emulate PS3, the RPCS3 emulator is the place to be. Watch this one as well because it's improving all the time. And the next emulator I want to talk about is the Xenia emulator, which emulates the Xbox 360. And in all fairness, when I first tried this a few years ago, it was patchy to say the least, but this has undergone a massive transformation to where it is in present day. And of course, the Xbox 360 had a whole slew of its own great exclusives as well. Now, some games with this will have minor graphical issues, most of them don't. You'll generally know straight away when loading a game how it's going to perform with this emulator. Within the first minute or two, if you've not experienced anything, generally it's going to work absolutely fine. I've played numerous games on this without issue. It's a great emulator as well. And just to name a few games, we've got like Stuntman Ignition, Red Dead Redemption 1 and the Undead Nightmare DLC work amazing on this, and I recently replayed Undead Nightmare all the way through using this exact Xenia emulator. And one interesting thing to note as well is that the classic N64 game GoldenEye actually had a remaster in the works for it to go out on the Xbox 360 Live Arcade service. That game never officially released, but it did leak a few years back, and I did a series of guide videos showing how to install it, how to play online multiplayer, how to run mouse and keyboard within this emulator on it as well, seeing as it's a first-person shooter. And I must say that it runs extremely well on this emulator, and I've actually hosted numerous online matches in the Discord server that I spoke about earlier, so please, I urge you to join that server. If you just want to talk about emulation, if you want to join online matches with people in there, I occasionally host matches myself as well. Yes, that's enough plugging of the Discord server, of course, but this is the way to play the GoldenEye remaster. And one of the main benefits of this emulator, unlike some of the others on this list, this emulator is very simple to install and run. You just download it, unpack it, run the Xenia exe and load your game ISO, and that's it. With other emulators on this list, you have to do things like install firmware and jump through some other hoops. Sometimes you need a BIOS file, things like that. This emulator works straight out the box, as it were. Don't need anything else, so very user friendly to set up. And like I say, in the description I will link my guide video. If you need any further help, join the Discord, I'll do my best to help you in there. Next up then, we have an emulator for a console that should need no introduction, but I'll give it an introduction anyway. The PlayStation 2, and the emulator we're talking about here is PCSX2. And once again, when I first tried this emulator many years ago, compatibility wasn't great. You had to change a lot of settings to get games working. But recently there's been a big push in the development of this emulator, and compatibility has improved dramatically. And just to give you an idea of how much this emulator has improved and how good it is, on the official compatibility list, 97.9% of games are playable and 1.2% are perfect. So over 99% of games you can use on this emulator that released for the PS2, and you can play them from start to finish with little to no technical difficulties. And seeing as the PS2 is so well known, I'm not going to even start listing any games for this, because we'll be here for several hours while I talk about great PS2 games. I may save that for another video, but every game I've ever played on this emulator has worked great, and you can scale up the resolution as well using hardware renderer. You can do all sorts of other things as well to tweak frame rates, all kinds of quality of life features that you come to expect from an emulator of this standard. And in all honesty, just from the sheer catalogue of PS2 games, this is probably the emulator I've spent the most time on over the years. I'm not going to lie, I've spent an insane amount of time playing games on this emulator. There's so many good games, and a lot of the PS2 games have held up extremely well. I mean, don't get me wrong, some haven't, but that is of course no fault of the emulator. So like I say, if you pick a PS2 game that you want to play, be safe in the knowledge that this is the emulator to pick for PS2 games in 2023 and way beyond that, because this is now getting regular updates for quite a long time. The development on this emulator went a bit stagnant. I don't want to use any stronger words than that, but yeah, for about a year or two it didn't receive any updates, but now there's a dedicated squad on this giving it regular updates, almost daily as well. There's improvements to this emulator, so yeah, into the future, just watch this space. It's just going to keep improving and improving. New features, better compatibility, better performance. Yeah, amazing. I can't sing the praises of this emulator enough. Next up then we have another fantastic emulator. This one is called Dolphin, and the Dolphin emulator emulates both the Nintendo Wii and the Nintendo GameCube. And first of all, as we know, the GameCube and the Nintendo Wii have an extremely vast catalogue of games. Not only that, but if you have actual Wiimotes, you can connect them to your PC and emulate the functions, so the function just like an actual Wiimote within the emulator. For the GameCube, you can actually emulate the controls on a normal controller. With the Wii controls, you can actually set them functions to control the buttons as well, so even if you don't have Wiimotes, there's a good chance you'll be able to play the Wii games even with motion functions and the point at screen functions of the Nintendo Wii. And it goes without saying, yes, we have all the upscaling options, loads of different graphical settings, and the compatibility once again on this emulator is beyond belief, with 97% of games being either playable or perfect. Over 36% of games on this play perfect, which means there's no graphical issues, no technical issues, but even playable means you can clear the game from start to finish with little to no technical issues whatsoever. And across the entire catalogue of the Nintendo Wii and the GameCube, that's a huge game list. That is quite the accomplishment. And once again, with some of the other emulators on this list, this one also supports online play within the emulator as well, and I've played a few games online with this. There's even servers where you can join random people and play games such as Mario Kart and all kinds of other, amazing GameCube or Nintendo Wii games, which is just absolutely fantastic. So if you've never owned a Nintendo GameCube, a lot of people didn't, a lot of people owned a Nintendo Wii, now's your chance to get hold of some of them games and be playing them on these emulators. Add all the quality of life features, better resolutions, better performance, everything like that, and be able to map all the controls to a better controller than the GameCube controller, because it sucked, let's be honest. yeah, you'll have a lot of fun with this emulator and all of the great games that come along with it. And the next console we are going to be emulating is the PSP, and this emulator is called PPSSPP. Yes, I know, it's a silly name because it has PP in it, but aside from the comical name, there is nothing comical about the performance of this emulator. And yes, like a lot of emulators on this list, it has all of the upscaling and graphical improvements you've come to expect from these modern emulators, but the PSP has an abundance of RPGs and racing games. Now, I am very happy to report that every game I have ever tried on the PPSSPP emulator has run flawlessly. Yeah, and I mean flawlessly. Not only that, but it has built-in online support where it actually emulates the ad hoc Wi-Fi functions of the actual PSP and lets that go over the internet. So games like Monster Hunter, of which the PSP had several, you can actually play full like guild quests and everything with your friends, and in some of the footage I'm going to put on screen, I will label it, that is actual online multiplayer footage that you're looking at as well on games like Virtua Tennis, Burnout Legends, Ace Combat, you know, some of these great games that released for the PSP. Not only that, the PSP had the Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories and Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories. Now, I know that they released later on for the PS2 and I think for the PC as well, but the PSP was their original home, and the PSP also has Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars, a whole slew, like I say, of great games. Lots that I've not even played myself but people are recommended to me, but obviously there's so many games between all of these emulators, not just the PSP, but the PSP has an insane catalogue and this emulator is not going to let you down. I can guarantee it, you will be impressed with how this emulator performs. I know the PSP was a handheld, it wasn't overpowered, so in theory it should be easier to emulate, but this emulator, I can't fault it. I've never had a single thing wrong with it. I think in potentially hundreds of hours playing PSP games on this emulator, I think I've had like one crash. That's it across all the different games. It just doesn't miss a beat. It's fantastic, highly recommended, and once again this gets regular updates as well, so yeah, one to watch out for going into 2023 and beyond. On to the 9th emulator on this list then, we have Duckstation, which is a PlayStation 1 emulator. Now, prior to the release of Duckstation a couple of years back, I had to use a combination of different PlayStation 1 emulators because certain emulators would play some games better than others, so you kind of have different emulators, different configuration settings for different games and things like that. Duckstation on the other hand came out of nowhere, an absolute breath of fresh air, and just seemingly played everything flawlessly with graphical enhancements, more settings than you can shake a stick at as well, and literally made the entire process of emulating PlayStation 1 games just completely streamlined. Not only that, I've not had a single game that doesn't work on this emulator. I know that there's a couple, but the compatibility list for this, it doesn't have a percentage rating, but as I've scrolled through, they are few and far between games that don't work on this. Maybe less than 1% do not work. I'm not kidding, this emulator is just an absolute breath of fresh air. Not only that, it's been instrumental in my recordings for the upcoming Strike series retrospective video, where I'm playing through Soviet Strike and Nuclear Strike, so you may get a little bit of footage from them games in this. And as we all know, the PlayStation had a very extensive catalogue of games. I think over 1,000 games released for the PlayStation 1. Some better than others, there was a lot of garbage. Not the emulator's fault, but there's so many great games for this, and hidden gems to this day. People are still recommending me games that I've not yet played, so I'm going to acquire those and get playing them at some point in the future, because obviously, like I say, with all the emulators and all the games that this gives access to for your PC or other device, is just absolutely mind-blowing. you know, one lifetime isn't enough. So just to get through the PS1 games, one lifetime is probably not enough. So if you're going to play PS1 games, Duckstation is the one to use. All other PS1 emulators, in my opinion, are now obsolete. They're not worth using. Go straight for Duckstation, get that installed, it'll play your games flawlessly, upscale them if your PC can handle it. You know, it's just mind-bending playing PS1 games in 4K, you know, widescreen hacks so you can force games to be widescreen. You know, it's just insane. And I did actually do a video of the top 10 PS1 games according to a gaming website, upscaled to 4K in the Duckstation emulator about 2 years ago, and that still gets a lot of views. So you can tell just how much people are looking for Duckstation content and reviews and things like that. So I will link that video in the description if you want to check that out, just to have a deeper dive into how good the Duckstation emulator works and how good it makes games look. But obviously in the footage on the video, just in the background as I'm talking, you can see how well this runs and how good the footage looks as well from the games. So get yourself Duckstation, there's no doubt. It's the only PS1 emulator I now use. All the others, they're not in the bin, but they may as well be, yeah. And the final emulator, or should I say emulators, on this list are going to be emulating the Nintendo Switch, of all things. And for this, I'm going to be talking about Ryujinx and Yuzu. Now, these are two separate emulators, completely separate projects, different teams, but for the purpose of Nintendo Switch emulation, I have to include both, because I will be honest, some games run better on Yuzu, other games run better on Ryujinx. Now, in itself, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not too tough to install both, but I will give you a heads up. You will need product keys and title keys from a Nintendo Switch console. So if you don't have a Nintendo Switch console you can extract them from, you may have trouble running these emulators. But what we're talking about here is actually the performance. And I can say very confidently from playing numerous Switch games between these two different emulators, the performance is great to fantastic. Now, once again, this is on the cutting edge of emulation. Bearing in mind the Switch is still a current console, games are still being released for it. So I will be honest, some games will not work on this emulator, just outright they won't work. Some games will have minor issues, some games will have major issues, but the vast majority of games that I've tried on this have worked great, and for the ones that work great, they have been fully playable from start to finish. I have had a lot of fun playing games on these two emulators. And just as an example of how cutting edge these emulators are, I got Pokemon Scarlet on release day and I extracted the cartridge and ran it in Ryujinx, and it ran great on day one of release of Pokemon Scarlet. Now, I know this may be a little bit of a unpopular opinion, but I think the games are actually quite good, and on the Ryujinx emulator they actually run really good as well. In all fairness, I've not tested on Yuzu. I did hear that Ryujinx was the better emulator for the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet games, so I've just stuck with that one. But there are other games I've run exclusively on Yuzu in the past as well. It's kind of a duality with Yuzu and Ryujinx. There's a group of people in the camp that Ryujinx is better. There's another group of people in another camp that think Ryujinx is better. But why not get both? Why not enjoy both? You know, and both are great in their own right. For Nintendo Switch emulation, those are the two options, and they are two very good options. To be able to play Switch games, some Switch games, on day one of release on something that isn't a Nintendo Switch just blows my mind on a current console. And with that being said, that's the 10 emulators I am going to highly recommend for 2023 and beyond. Now, I know in this video I missed a lot of emulators. We're talking Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, Super Nintendo, the original Nintendo, Sega Saturn, Sega Dreamcast, along with many others, including MAME. But I wanted this to be a selection of emulators that I'm using very heavily at the moment, and have been for at least the past 6 months. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video. And if you have enjoyed the video, then I'm pretty sure you're going to like some of my future videos. So I think only for maybe the 3rd time in this video, I'll just ask you very nicely, please subscribe. I asked twice at the beginning. I try not to go on about them kind of things, but it really does help to subscribe to the channel, you know. And in the comments as well, please let me know any future emulated stuff, retro stuff you'd like me to cover, and I'll try and tailor future content to what people are telling me they want to see. So please do that. And yeah, I hope you all have a great day. Much love, everybody. You know, big thank you to all the existing subs as well for the recent 10,000 subscriber milestone. It's blowing my mind. I really never thought I'd get to 10,000 subs, you know. It made me really happy with that. And yeah, I guess road to 20k. I guess we'll just keep going with it. We'll just go on this crazy journey, you know, just see where it goes. So yeah, all the best, everybody. Much love. Hope you have a great day. All the best. See you in the next video. Bye bye.